Chris, welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Great to be here.
So, for those who don't know Chris Rickard, he's a project manager and a software engineer. He started his own software development agency in 2012, and there he had to teach himself to be a project manager and a business analyst so he could successfully deliver his own projects. His agency delivered large projects, often 12 months or longer. But he found that it was the requirements gathering and the requirements management processes that had the most impact on the success of his projects. So when, after 8 years, Chris's agency was acquired, he was able to focus on building a platform to help with requirements management. And that platform is now available, and it's called Userdoc. And importantly, it makes effective use of AI to help businesses that use Userdoc to move faster. And that's why I wanted to speak with you, Chris, today about whether AI can write our user requirements for us. So, Chris, welcome.
Thank you so much. And it's a interesting topic, and I'm sure everyone has an opinion on this, but I'm glad to be here and share mine.
What's really important to me about this is it combines two, I think, of my most important current topics: the gathering of user requirements, and as a part of what I think of as project definition, is and always has been for me the key stage in a project. And now everyone's talking about AI, and is it really of use? So I think we can kind of combine those two and get a lot of real value out of understanding how we can use AI as a practical tool to support us in this vital step. So let's start with that user requirements thing, because capturing them, understanding them accurately is critical to success of projects. You and I both agree on that. So can you start by just giving us an outline of the process that you've used in the types of projects you've led as a project manager?
I think first and foremost, it definitely involves human involvement and conversation. And like in my history, irrespective of AI, it would normally involve lots of workshops with the key stakeholders and the people involved, obviously like teasing out those little bits of information. Mm-hmm. I would generally start quite high level and get deeper as we go along. I sort of subscribed to the more agile methodologies of capturing user stories, user personas, and so on. Whether or not my software development company was fully agile or not, I still really enjoyed, or rather not enjoyed, I still felt it was very important to align to some of those methodologies, putting the user first, especially when talking to often non-technical stakeholders. Yeah. So I would sort of basically start with user personas. So start with who in the business or who in their outside world, end customers, who are we solving this problem for? What do they do? What are their goals? What are their frustrations? After covering that with in a workshop with stakeholders, then to user stories. So the features, what do they need to do? Why do they need to do it? As an administrator, I need to view the report so I can understand what's going on and accurately solve the business's problems, whatever that may be. Would then delve deeper into like the acceptance criteria. So the individual parts of that feature in a software system, like what would need to happen for that to be successful. So, yeah. To register on a system, you need to fill out these fields, you need to add this information and so on. And then sort of tie that all together with user journeys. So, sort of if that's the vertical of what needs to happen, the journeys would be the horizontal slices through the system. I would do it as a narrative.
Yeah.
So involving those personas and making it quite a narrative journey, which I would find, sometimes these requirement elicitation phases would take months, and yes. Using it, putting those sort of real people involved and cross-referencing with journeys helps people, I guess, really have a picture the software system without having it been built yet. So, yeah. I started doing that about 10 years ago when I first got into agile development. It was one of the largest things I kept from agile, to be honest. And yeah, it worked really well for us. And so at the end of that session, you end up with, or multiple sessions normally, you end up with a bunch of requirements that would be in a collaborative documentation space. And then we'd refine that as we go along. So quite iterative.
Yeah. And I think I agree with you. The idea of user stories and story mapping, which it's kind of how we turn those user stories into a journey, isn't it, really? But those tools, I think, they're tools that have come out of the agile mindset. But whether you're doing a purely agile, a hybrid, or even a very largely predictive project, capturing user stories is a great format for defining requirements. And I really do agree with you that, sometimes it does take a long time to define those requirements, but it's time well spent. But once you've captured those requirements and you've had them signed off, is that it? Is this a one and done process? Can we now forget it and just write our code?
Good. This is a question very close to my heart. Traditionally, I would say most people say yes as an answer to that question. You go through this phase, assumably the end of this phase, the requirements phase, is you've won it, you've succeeded, and now we can start, and can forget about it. We've got our document, signed the contract, you're done. And to be honest, that's how I used to approach my software projects as a project manager. Essentially, over the years and working on larger and larger projects, I realized that not throwing them away, or I don't mean throwing them away. I'm saying not having them set in stone. That's rather what I'm saying. So, I use the term living requirements, or you turn your requirements into documentation, essentially. So the requirements are obviously valuable for everyone involved, the business, to know what they're getting. They need that as a big tick of approval. Developers need that to know what to do. QA testers need that know what to test, and everyone at the end goes, yes, we've delivered this. But throughout that process, everyone who's probably watching this would understand that requirements evolve. It's those little nuances, that little conversation, that little email, that little bit of QA feedback that you go, we didn't. Yeah, exactly. Of course we didn't get this right 6 months ago when we were in that room doing acceptance criteria. It's not perfect. So, whether it's waterfall or agile, I think ultimately at the end of the day, you cannot get them perfect. And so I come from the point of view of embracing the flow of requirements. It's a whole other conversation about how you deal with that in terms of time and cost. But I mean, generally, I kind of look at giving the project its room to breathe and to do the best thing for the project. And that doesn't usually mean locking requirements away from the day that we've agreed them. It usually means iterating and having those conversations, often hard conversations that come up about, being incorrect historically.
And even back when I was involved in software projects, late 90s, early, so before people were really thinking agile, we were still kind of having this living user requirements thing, so that the change control process was baked into the weekly cycle of the project. So you'd constantly be looking at what new ideas of users come up with, what challenges are we facing, where we found new technological solutions that we hadn't envisaged. Bring that through, a change control process that is fit for the client's governance needs, but then update the user requirements constantly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of businesses do this, and I've spoken to a lot over the years that do this. I think there was a thing, and I'm talking about agile a bit here because I think it's important. There was a waterfall was traditionally build this giant 500-page requirements document, and that's the project. You finish it, and you're done and awesome. And agile was a bit of an obvious reaction to that, which was no, actually, that's not working for everything. And what we're ending up with is not what the users really want. So let's, it's in one of the tenets is like, conversations over comprehensive documentation or requirements. So it's more about those allowing the space for conversations and end users. But I do think there's a middle ground there. And I think perhaps lots of people went too far in the agile direction, which at the end of a complex project, you actually end up with no documentation. And those requirements that you did a year ago are out of date and they've gone, and that's okay for the project. But what happens in the future of the project? What happens when someone needs a change? And what happens when the project manager leaves because he's gone to another company and all the developers have moved to startups? So I think that's what a lot of people have sort of realized, and they've invented their own ways of handling that.
Yeah, we need to be pragmatic, don't we? We need to choose a project style that suits the situation. And if you go to one extreme or another, it's unlikely to suit many situations. And I like that. But I want to move now to this AI thing because it staggers me what AI can do. And I think you found a really interesting use case for AI for project managers that actually plays to its strengths and is a real use of AI, not just some kind of bolt on, oh, let's get ChatGPT to write my emails for me. So how can AI help in the process of capturing and recording customer requirements in a real project environment?
Yeah. And look, it's a really good question. I think it's quite a broad question, but I think I'll start and say, like I'm very much on the side of augmentation over replacement. And so by that, I across the board, and I work with AI in my day-to-day job, and I do consulting as AI as well for software companies. I'm generally thinking that at the moment we should not be replacing anything, essentially. So first and foremost, knowledge obviously has to come from end users and stakeholders. So in terms, I think you said like the capturing of requirements. Capturing is a good word. I think it can facilitate the capturing, but it certainly can't do any type of replacing. And AI is, and I've seen quite a few AI related videos. Like AI will always have an answer. It's very confidently incorrect. So people need to be very, and I like that term. People need to be very aware about this, and that can often make people afraid, and they don't know like how they can use it and where they can use it. But I'll say from my point of view, in terms of requirements gathering and elicitation and that sort of thing, everything I explained at the start about how I ran my process, I think you still need to do. You still need to do those workshops, get the stakeholders on board, tease out, have those hard conversations, and keep digging, keep asking why. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what you're left with there is something I like to call knowledge. So, knowledge, it's not yet requirements. It's some knowledge that you need to take and sort of work into a series of requirements that then people can look back at and say, yeah, that is what I meant to say. And you've added a technical lens, or you've added your professional lens on top of it. So you still definitely need those processes. It can't replace those by any means. I think what it's obviously awesome at is like summarizing and referencing and creating a great first draft. Yeah. And I think across the board, first draft is another term I use a lot. You feed in the correct information, and AI can obviously then help you. It can facilitate the outcome. But if you don't put in that information, it's just going to be that confidently incorrect again, which if you don't have the knowledge, you could very easily take as correct. Yeah. So if you were obviously to talk to ChatGPT or any of the up and coming AIs, Bard or whatever it is, you could ask it, can you create me 50 user stories for a healthcare system where a patient logs on, and of course it will do it. Yeah. The thing is, you need to feed it. You need to have already had those conversations with the end users and stakeholders and fed that into it in a controlled manner. This is the other thing. It's like ChatGPT is, it's the minimum viable product of AI user interfaces right now. It's a text box. It's a text box that you can type in, fully open-ended, no constraints. And that's both it's a blessing and a curse. So, sorry, I might have gone off track, but my answer is essentially like how it can record and facilitate the capturing and recording is all the gathering and elicitation is still done as is, a structured manner with specific prompts at certain points that ask things, and then it can go and create that first draft with the feedback loop for you to be able to make those changes. That's so I think, and that's across the board in any system right now with AI. So you're moving towards where I wanted to go next, actually, because you've described Userdoc as a fusion of good old-fashioned human intelligence and AI. So can you describe or show to us how it works? What is the process for using Userdoc, and what's the rationale for the choices that you've made as a software engineer in balancing these two really important different ways of working? Definitely. I'll just share my screen. Yeah. So what we're looking at, there's sort of two parts to Userdoc. There's an onboarding flow. which is it helps with that requirements elicitation. Now, imagine there's two groups of users. Ideally, there's those that have had those meetings and talked to their stakeholders and teased out all the important information. But sometimes there are ones that need an AI to help guide them, right? So this onboarding flow is currently accounting for both of those.
Yeah.
So I'm going to run through it and then I'll show you what it will be like at the end. So we basically give a project a name. Now, this is where you type it in, but I've preset this up for brevity for this chat. So Health Connect, spelled like a startup, is like well, actually, I'll go to the next screen. Next screen is a description. So this is an open-ended text box, but it's very clear. We just want to know what it does and how you use it. So essentially like a small little summary. Now, if I was to click this little sparkly button, it would go on and regenerate this summary based on its previous understanding, but I'll leave it for now. So this is an app for patients to communicate with healthcare providers. So if we go next down this, if this wasn't already filled out, this is all generated by AI. I just did this before the chat. So this comes back and tells you the user types. It doesn't necessarily fill all this information out. It's for you to put the information in as well. But, there's patients, healthcare providers, and administrators. We can add more different types of users of the system. Or we can, again, use AI to help us come up with a first draft of what they need. But essentially, this describes what they do in the system and, what features and how they relate to each other. The next section is an important one, which is a lot of people use Userdoc and don't generate their requirements with AI. They simply use it as a requirements management tool and they know what they want to enter. But if we go down the path of saying, yes, we want to do AI, it'll then take us to a screen which is these generated AI features of the system. So these are our three user types we captured on the screen before. We've got a patient, healthcare provider, and administrator of the system. And these are the different features that Userdoc is recommending based on all the information you gave it. So these are the user story titles, so to speak. But again, we can add new ones here. So we're not constrained by any means. We can add our own ones in and we can add a little description, or we can go in and edit them. So if I go to, for a patient, there's register, log in, create a profile, so on. I can ask, create a profile. It says here the fields are full name, email, date of birth. We can put in our fields here. So if we know we also want to capture gender or whatever it may be, we've got full control here. Once we've confirmed these features and done whatever we want, we can click next. What that'll do is it'll take about 1 to 2 minutes, and it'll then take you to what I've already prepared, which is the Userdoc project. So this looks quite different, but this is like the main Userdoc system once you've gone through the onboarding flow. So here we're looking at the Health Connect project, and down the left-hand side, we've got all our user stories, but now they're fully fleshed out. So if I click on the patient register story, I see as a patient, I want to register to Health Connect so I can communicate with my healthcare providers and manage my healthcare records. Correct. And underneath that is very detailed acceptance criteria. So this is for the software feature, displays this heading, displays the form fields, name, email, and you'll notice they've actually got already down to like the amount of characters they support and the fact that it has to be a valid email address. And
all of that has been generated by the AI interpreting the information?
Correct. Just before we came, I ran through that wizard and I generated this project.
But critically, you didn't type in that description and the acceptance criteria for the user story. The AI has used its, for want of a better word, knowledge to understand what you did put in and generate that for you as a first draft.
Pretty much. It's used its knowledge, plus we augment the AI with many examples of very detailed user stories and acceptance criteria from fictional systems. So it's been pre-trained on this type of information, so it knows the format to do it. It's quite a structured format, as you'll see. It knows how to do that, essentially. And it also has been trained to get to the detail, like password policies, minimum length. So it goes into a lot of detail. So Userdoc creates these user stories. It also shows you the flow. So this is the patient login. After they sign in and the field's validated, it goes to the patient dashboard. And now that's a link to the patient dashboard story. So you can see that it shows you that flow through the system. And it's great for communicating requirements and people keeping them up to date. And so you can edit all of these. So again, first draft, as we said, we can say on the dashboard of this patient, you want to see the referrals, and you might also want to see, last visited date. All this information you can just come in and put in, obviously. You can save that, and you can also, I haven't set it up with this project, but you can synchronize this with your project management tools. So where Userdoc is sort of the AI is the facilitator, it's also a requirements management system which allows you to go and implement that, but keep Userdoc as the source of truth for the documentation. So as we we're talking about at the start, the project ends. No one knows, what the requirements were. The concept is that people come back to Userdoc, keep these stories and acceptance criteria up to date as changes happen, instead of keeping all your knowledge in a project management tool that eventually kind of, when everything's done, it disappears. Yeah. You keep this as the source of truth.
So if I'm using, for example, Jira, I could then export this to Jira with a kind of live current link that then Jira then treats this as the backlog.
Yeah, exactly right. And I should have synchronized it. I should have set this up before, but we can sync it to Jira. You can then come back and you can make changes to your story. So I could remove these, let's say, for whatever reason, I'm removing these 3 fields from this page. That creates a new version of this feature. And I can go and look at the history, and the history shows me, if I look at the difference, it shows me that I've removed these when it's red and underlined. I can actually sync that. I can synchronize that to Jira. So what that represents is a change to a feature. So if instead of making new Jira tickets all the time describing what needs to happen, you update the documentation and synchronize that to Jira, as a byproduct of that, you end up with living documentation, which was the big impetus even before AI. That was my big impetus for building Userdoc.
But it's also important because going back to the more traditional predictive projects where governance is a high priority, you're showing that traceability of all the decisions that have been made and when they were made, because it's all recorded by Userdoc.
Correct. So if you think about this, I was talking to someone today who is using Userdoc for like a tender application. So if you think about it from that point of view, they use it for the initial applying for this tender. They make all revisions the whole way through the process and they get accepted and they win it, and then they keep going. They've got that reference to what it was at the start, the changes throughout. And that's very important, as you said, for governance and traceability, especially in like a very large government tender situation.
Yeah.
I'll just run through like some other features of Userdoc. On the left, we've also got the user types. So these are the 3 types of users we found at the start: patients, healthcare providers, and admins. So it's gone through and generated, 2 different personas of patients in the system. So Alicia Gomez, 29, from Florida, and you could have put more information to change this. Type 2 diabetes, originally moved from Spain. All this stuff about user personas. Obviously, her goal is healthy lifestyle. Frustrations are timely appointments with healthcare providers. So again, it's a conversation I need to also say, we don't want this to replace any interactions. You should know your user personas, and but this is a great first draft. You can obviously edit all of these, you can add your own and so on. What took about under 10 minutes for me to put in this before our call, it's probably somewhere around 5 to 10 days worth of work for a product owner or business analyst creating all this information.
Well, I'm thinking back, for a startup that actually hasn't yet developed its user personas, it's great. Built into this is just one more thing that you have to do that it does for you, which is suggest user personas that you can tinker with. But I remember it took me the best part of a day just coming up with the first draft of the user personas when I started building online PM courses just as a marketing tool. So I think that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Userdoc is used on software projects that are running and they're going ahead and they've won it. But as you mentioned, it's also used for UI and UX research, which I actually wasn't expecting. People use it for that persona, getting different ideas for personas. And you can change this information and you can say that they're from, London, England, or you can say whatever that is, and it will adhere to that. To what I mentioned at the start, it's more of a structured, standardized flow through the creation. Yeah. Where ChatGPT is just it's an endless world behind there.
With ChatGPT, you have to basically use your flow, put the information in, take it out, and put it into another tool. Whereas this, it sits within the one tool and it guides you through the process, which for lots of organizations, I expect is going to be hugely valuable.
Yeah, that's right. And lastly, the third component is the user journey. So again, I've just mapped this to exactly how I did the process in my business. So the user journeys, describe a patient interaction for the system. So, step 1, Alicia downloads the application. She sets up a profile. She communicates with her doctor. And this shows the different personas that are involved in each step. It paints that picture, right? So it's not just about at the start of the project agreeing to what's done. In my mind, before all this, I was a software engineer for 18 years. I would start on new software systems and I wouldn't have an understanding who the end users were because I was not involved in that conversation. I wasn't in the workshops. I just got handed requirements. So this is also why I built Userdoc, to democratize this information about the project, why we're doing it across the team, not just for those involved at the start of the project.
Yeah. And presumably you can drill down into those to look at the user stories that sit within each stage of the journey.
Exactly, that's right. So you can, I didn't do it in this one, but you can actually go through and you can tag those different user stories. So you can set up a very distinct flow of all the different touch points in the system.
So there's your story map, isn't it? It's exactly what a story map is. Yeah.
Exactly. And the only feature I'd want to demo, again, I've got to find a good example, but you can chat to your stories. So asking questions of your requirements or asking confirmation. So, how do I review a healthcare provider? So I've spelt that all wrong, because it's a live demo. Of course, I spelt it wrong. I'm going to leave it wrong and we'll see how it goes. So essentially, you can ask Userdoc's AI questions that are very much just about bingo, very much about your project.
Yeah.
So it picked up this story here, review healthcare provider, and it told you the exact steps involved in it. So this is important for a lot of our customers who have very large projects. People forget what's going on. You can't keep everything in your head anymore. And so whether that's like detail on, I forget what our password policy is, or I forget what we agreed. So just being able to ask, over 100 user stories or 200 user stories, what the answer is. Now, we talked about confidently incorrect, which AI gets sometimes. So the important factor here is it mentions below the stories that were referenced.
Yeah.
So you can actually cross-reference this to its source of truth, and you can click on that to go and see that this is that information. So with anything, I'd say you always need, especially when asking questions, you want to make sure that where the information is coming from is accurate. So this can help you, locate that, and then you can confirm it yourself. But that's a quick overview of Userdoc. So AI facilitated. AI, helps you with that first draft, but then also like a living documentation requirements management tool to integrate with your existing project management tools.
Yeah. Like a lot of people, this feels a bit like magic. So I understand how this works in a kind of conceptual sense of step by step, but it feels when you're using this, and I've played with it as well, because as I'm sure you'll go on to tell us, there's free demonstration. It feels like the AI system really understands your process. Once you've built it and amended its first guesses, and it's and you've built your user stories and you've confirmed all but it's when you're interacting with it, it actually feels like the AI understands you, which clearly it doesn't because it's just a computer. So as a software engineer who has worked with AI, can you explain how it is that AI appears to understand the processes and what we need from them?
Yeah, I guess broadly, in its raw form. So let's say you're talking to ChatGPT, because ChatGPT has no, everyone gets the same thing. They're just starting with that clean slate of the AI model. You're essentially talking directly to the AI.
And we should say other AI models are available from other providers.
Oh, yes, definitely. And I'm very excited about Gemini 1.5 Pro that's going to be coming out shortly by Google, which is, another very, just as good as like GPT-4, supposedly, by OpenAI. But when you're talking to any of those models, you're basically just working with the knowledge that they've accrued of the world. Now, that's, again, very broad. But the best way to say it is, now more than ever, data is worth more than gold, essentially. And one big concern from AI companies is they're running out of data. And you'll see this in a lot of the new models being released. They can read video, they can read images, they can write video. A big reason for that is because that's a whole other source of untapped data. Now, that all comes to like how do they appear to know what we want? Yeah. Essentially, I look at it as the most knowledgeable junior intern you've ever had in the world, because they've got all the facts out there. They've read what everyone else thinks about. They've got every blog post, read all the source code on GitHub and everything like that. But they haven't done anything in action. They haven't done it themselves. They haven't learnt themselves. So, it's that it's essentially they can appear to know all the answers, and that's where humans in the loop are vitally important, because you need to augment that with your actual knowledge. But essentially, the way I look at it is someone who has never stepped out of their house, but they know all of the information in the world. That's how I view AI.
Yeah, the way you explain it, it feels to me, when I was starting out my career, I was a bright young consultant out of college, and one of the clients asked me, what good are consultants? You haven't got years of experience in our business. and I remember answering, I learn fast. And
very good point.
And because I learn fast, I can spot things and I can make suggestions and I can be useful. And I will sometimes get it wrong, because I will make assumptions that aren't correct, because I have gaps in my knowledge. And I think it feels to me like AI is really just a bright young consultant. It has
that's
a lot of the same strengths and a lot of the same weaknesses. And of course, the arrogant young consultant will pretend they know things they don't and fill in the gaps with BS. And we know that is exactly what AI will do. We call it hallucinations, but if AI doesn't know, it will confidently recite something plausible. So I think that's a really good explanation.
It's a fantastic analogy. I wish I had said that. Next time I'll say it on the next interview. I'll just say one small addition to that is, because I really love your junior consultant analogy.
Yeah.
The one difference is where that consultant can, stand on a meeting and learn, and they can, be thrown on this task that's a bit, out of their depth, and they can finally get better at it. AI models will not learn unless they have been fine-tuned, unless they have been specifically trained or fine-tuned on top of that. So ChatGPT will not actually, the model behind it, or Gemini or Mistral or whatever these models, they will not learn from your information unless the company releases something and they've learnt from that. Essentially, it's just via the window of the data that you can send it is the only method of communication, unless you actually fine-tune a model. And I think that's probably important to your listeners as well.
But to follow through on that metaphor, though, that fine-tuning is rather like you give a consultant or any professional feedback on their work. But when we look at even what ChatGPT is doing, sometimes it says, how was my answer? And that is when we train the core models, a lot of that is about giving it feedback and saying, actually, that's the wrong answer. I remember early on in ChatGPT, there was that whole thing about it didn't understand maths, and therefore it would get maths wrong. If you say, what is 1 + 1? It says 2, and you say, wrong, it's 3. It then confidently says, oh, I'm sorry, it's 3. Goodness knows what idiots doing that to it have caused. But I think that ability to give feedback to the system in the way that these systems are being developed is important. And I know that a lot of the people who are developing the Geminis and the ChatGPTs and the Perplexities of this world, they are using feedback methods and they're recruiting.
And that's actually, that human feedback is basically why those amazing models are here today, because, they've been going on for a long time, but it was supposedly like the humans, that stage before they're released where humans give a lot of feedback is what significantly propelled them to intelligence.
And that leads us on. AI capabilities are changing fast. We seem to have come a long way, even in I suppose it's about 18 months since ChatGPT kind of broke in the news. And lots of people like you are bringing out applications that are using it, but the capabilities that you are relying on are growing rapidly. So what are your hopes and possibly expectations for what a tool like Userdoc might be able to do in the future that you haven't been able to put into it today? Yeah,
great question. And funnily enough, it's something that I've been tackling about once every 3 months with Userdoc.
Yeah.
By that, I mean something I couldn't achieve 2 quarters ago, I achieved 1 quarter ago.
Yeah.
A lot of it comes down to, I mentioned like the prompt or the context window, we call it. The amount of data you can send it. It was always a very large limitation for anyone using generative AI models. Initially it was 4,000 words essentially, or tokens. And And then, it went up to 8,000. And then, mid last year, GPT 3.5 went up to 16. This is all the open AI models. So that was, in terms of developing Userdoc, whilst that was evolving, was quite interesting. Essentially, what it's allowed me to do is in that space of I showed you the wizard. Now you can go to that wizard and have a very set up, you can download those documents. It's 70 pages of user stories and acceptance criteria that was created in under 10 minutes. 12 months ago, it wasn't like that. It was much slower and bare bones. But looking forward to the future, again, it's moving equally as rapidly. A requested feature that I'm hoping to release in the next few weeks is the ability to upload documents. So essentially, it all comes down to one core factor, which is giving Userdoc more knowledge about your business, your project, and your outcomes. And those knowledge comes in various formats. And at the moment, people have to type into text boxes, and that's okay. People are still seeing the benefits, and that's fine. But yeah, I was trialing it this morning, and essentially the ability to be able to upload a document that could be a product specification, functional specification, tender brief, whatever this may be, and use that as a source of knowledge during that elicitation process. And so instead of that typing, I can upload a document that the business usually works out anyway. Before they get to a lot of projects, the business has done an internal case study, got the budget, we've come up with this document. So it's just about moving faster and about the product team being able to get that faster into executable requirements. So the document's a big part of that, and not just one, but multiple sources of documents. So you could be building a Userdoc project that has knowledge of the technical specifications, the document with API integrations, the product documentation, the legal requirements, terms and conditions. So that's one big part on the roadmap right now. Just around the corner, I think it's very, very close, is the ability to be able to upload user interface designs. So a lot of businesses don't work, they're more design oriented, so they often don't have a lot of documents and documentation. They start with wireframes and sketches, and then they go on to like more high fidelity designs in tools like Figma and such. I've been prototyping for the last few weeks the ability to take designs of your system and obviously using AI to figure out the requirements on that screen. And I think I'm very excited about that one because it unlocks a whole lot of people who work in a much more visual manner.
I mean, we're talking on a tool, Zoom, which can record and AI can summarize this conversation. The ability to feed that in as a document, but also, just show it the whiteboard, just photograph the whiteboard and feed it in. Exactly. It just never ends.
So my prototyping from the visual aspect of it, it doesn't seem to matter whether you've got a very high fidelity, beautiful looking design or you've got a sketch on a whiteboard. The requirements are picked up equally as detailed. So it actually, it's very interesting. And also something I'm toying with is the concept of for like more ongoing requirements and more larger software systems that do sprints all the time. So maybe product companies, the ability to just sort of upload audio. So you have a product meeting where you're in there and you're talking about upcoming sprints, and you go, this idea specifically, let's like hash this out and talk about that. And then you go, all right, I want to zoom in on that, and I want to create the 5 different user stories and requirements that we captured in this morning's meeting. So basically, it all comes down to those different, like multimodal ways of augmenting knowledge into Userdoc, which generally, take Userdoc out of that equation, that's what many AI products are doing right now. We just need more access to the knowledge of the business and the people. Building a beautiful 3D avatar or creating an AI song out of no knowledge, all that sort of is fun and it's enjoyable. But I really like the business automation and augmenting the back office and helping them move faster. So all my focus is basically on knowledge data essentially.
And I think like a lot of startup businesses, and I think this is a kind of good message for you to be putting out to the project management community. The challenge isn't what can you do, it's actually what will you do. It's back to user requirements. You're selling a product. And therefore, your imagination has to be limited by actually what's going to be useful to the community and what makes sense for this product. And that's the biggest challenge. Not these days. I mean, frankly, you could get the AI to write the code. So actually coding up more capabilities isn't the challenge. It's thinking through very carefully what the users need, speaking to real world customers, in your case, users, finding out their things. So it kind of brings us in full circle that are you using Userdoc to develop Userdoc?
Definitely. I'm using it. You know, there was a point in it. I've been doing it for about a year now. There was a point where it was becoming too large for me to keep in my head.
Yeah.
And I would start forgetting, if I touch that and change this and stuff. So yeah, I went back and I've got a version of Userdoc with Userdoc inside it. So it's a good saying, like eat my own dog food, if that's what it's called.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So I think people will be quite excited by this. So to finish, start off with, if people want to find out more about Userdoc and give it a spin, how can they do that?
Yeah. So you can jump on our website at userdoc.fyi. So for your information is the ending of that. So screen. It's not .com. Yeah, perfect. And there's a free 14-day trial, and that 14-day trial, it's got some limitations, like there's 3 projects and stuff like that, but it's definitely enough for people to fully see and expand. You can interact with all the AI, create all your requirements, and then our pricing's super reasonable. So it's $12 a month if if you're a small team or if you have a few projects. And I say it's reasonable because our studies have shown from one of our large enterprise clients that they're creating requirements up to 70% faster than manually.
Yeah.
And that's even going back to the first draft and revising it. But yeah, so jump on, free trial after that 14 days. Also, if you want an extension, email me and we'll have a chat. I'd like to hear your feedback, so I'm happy to give you an extension on the trial.
So good feedback is the price of an extension.
Correct.
And if people are interested in engaging with you as an expert in both user requirements and in AI development, they're interested in your ideas, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so probably LinkedIn is the best way.
Good.
I can't remember my LinkedIn URL, but I'm guessing we can show that down below as well.
It'll be on the screen and it'll be in the description.
Awesome.
Absolutely. And I think that's how we first got in touch. So it really does work. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, and I'll also link to a video that is a slightly longer version of the demo that shows how the wizard works. Chris, this has been absolutely fascinating and
awesome.
Fantastic insight into how a software engineer thinks about requirements gathering and then turns that into a requirements gathering tool. Thank you very much for giving us all your time, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. It's been fantastic. Thank you. See you guys.
Take care. Please do give us a thumbs up if you like this video. I'll be creating loads more great project management content, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of it. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.